All right. So, welcome to part 5 of our AP Psych biological basis of behavior. We're going to be talking about our next portion of the brain, which is the limbic system. Okay, the limbic system is also sometimes referred to as the mammal brain. Again, usually these kind of mammal brain or lizard brain, or our next one will be ape brain, right? The kind of connections there have to do with kind of the level of thought that we see in that group of animals. Right, so for example, right, the kind of one of the bigger differences we see between like mammals and like lizards is that addition of emotion, right? Like if you have a dog or a cat even, right, or other mammals, right, you can see emotion in them, right? Your dog gets sad or happy, where like if you have a lizard, it may or may not really kind of show that to you. Okay, so that's what we're going to be talking about here with the limbic system as we continue on our way from the inside out of the brain. So, our first kind of piece here is what is called the amygdala. Now, and actually, let me go back for 1 second. So here is our different portions of the limbic system. Notice it's kind of like oddly shaped. There's kind of a bunch of little pieces and kind of like almost tube-looking things that kind of like wrap around. A lot of this is wrapping around kind of the brainstem, right? You can see the thalamus here in the middle, and then these other pieces kind of wrapping around and being attached to it. Okay, so the first piece we're going to look at is the amygdala, right? The amygdala is like a tiny little, it's like a pea-sized little kind of ball that is at the end of the hippocampus, right? We haven't talked about the hippocampus yet, but we will. It's at the end there. Okay, again, there's one on each side, so the left and the right side, and there's this little kind of pea-shaped little ball at the end there. Okay, now the two big things that the amygdala is going to be connected with are the emotions of fear and aggression, right, or anger, right, fear and aggression. So we actually see that like when we experience damage in these areas, right, that's what's affected. So we can see where if someone, again, it depends on like what part of the amygdala, and we could be much more specific, or you would be if you were studying this, right, but if like a specific part of the amygdala gets damaged, right, we see patients that will literally lack those emotions, right, so they won't experience fear at all. Right, or they won't experience aggression at all. We can also see it do the opposite. So when we stimulate these areas, right, they've done experiments where they've like stimulated the amygdala in certain mammals, and what they see is they actually become aggressive or become fearful, right? So again, the amygdala is connected with fear and with aggression. Our next piece is the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus is, it's really odd shaped, and it's really tricky because it kind of looks different every time, like every different way you see it. And again, it's really good when you go through, as we go through these parts of the brain, to go through those coloring books as well and kind of be filling these in, especially for the hypothalamus. It's just a tricky one where like sometimes it kind of looks like this little like, it's kind of like pointed, right? Like a pointed, I don't know, it's not even really a shape. Sometimes it'll be like circular, sometimes it'll come up even different, so it kind of just depends on like how they're cutting the brain at the time. So it's good to see it from a bunch of different angles and what it could look like. Right? Now, a nice way to remember the hypothalamus is that hypo means below, and then so it's just below the thalamus. Right? So if we look at this image here, here is our thalamus, that little egg, right, shaped right there, and then just below it is our hypothalamus. Okay, so here's the thalamus. Hypo means below the thalamus. All right, so the hypothalamus is really focused on like regulating and maintaining our body, right? So things like hunger, thirst, temperature, sexual behavior, right, are all going to be maintained by our hypothalamus, right? So when you feel hungry, that's because your hypothalamus is telling you to feel hungry, right? When you're not hungry anymore, right, you've eaten, you don't feel hungry anymore, again, that's our hypothalamus telling us, okay, you don't need to eat anymore. We also see the hypothalamus connected with our endocrine system, right? We haven't talked about that at all. That's the hormonal part of kind of the communication system of the body, as well as our reward centers, right? So we kind of talked about that when we talked about neurotransmitters. You can kind of think about pretty much all of these different things, feeling hungry, thirsty, that regulation of sexual behavior, right, are all connected with rewards, right? When you eat, you feel better, right? When you're hungry and you get something to drink, you feel better, right? You get rewarded for that. So there's a connection between that hypothalamus and maintaining these things and the reward centers and the rewards we get for making sure that we are fulfilling those needs of our body. Our next one, hippocampus. So again, the hippocampus is kind of like this little like snail or worm or whatever you want to call it, right here. It kind of like wraps around. It's almost like a horn, maybe too, like a bighorn sheep kind of, right? It is kind of actually has a few different functions, but the really big important one is the processing of conscious explicit memories. Now, we don't really talk too much about memories just yet. We do that in the cognition section of the class. But basically, it's the things that we are consciously aware of and our explicit memories, right? So things that we are, like if you're like trying to study something or memorize something, that's a conscious explicit memory, right? You're putting effort into remembering it, or you're consciously going through it, or you're thinking about it at the moment, okay? We actually see that it gets smaller, it decreases in size as we get older, right? And we can see this going hand in hand with a decrease in the function, okay? So we actually see that where as young kids, it's actually easier for us to learn things than it is an adult, right? That kind of idea of like, or the saying like, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, that's actually at least partially due to the hippocampus, right? Is that when we're really young, we're really, really, really good at learning, right? Like little kids are able to learn really, really quickly. Where as we get older, it becomes harder and harder to learn new things, right? And partially that is because of the hippocampus. We also see that this kind of connection to memory, right? Because if it is damaged, right, we actually see a loss in the ability to form new memories. Again, we'll talk about this when we talk about cognition and kind of consciousness specifically, and memory specifically. But there's been people in the past who, have this damaged, and they literally lose the ability to like make any new memories. So they remember everything in their past, right? But they are unable to remember anything new, right? I believe it's called anterograde amnesia, right? And I might be wrong on that, so don't quote me there. But basically, again, they remember everything up until a certain point when that damage happens. Once that damage happens, they're unable to create new memories. So they never remember anything past that one specific time, okay? So again, very, very connected and very